What are we doing? What is this? Where am I? We're doing a podcast, right? Is that
You're on the severed floor of a traction lab of zero to traction.
that's a let's say a deep cut reference. I don't know how many of our listeners are gonna get, but welcome to Zero to Traction, a podcast about how first time founders create companies that scale. I'm one of your regular co-hosts, JDM, aka Josh David Miller, coming at you with my other regular co-host, Cameron Law. Cam, how are you today?
Doing wonderful. Excited to have another discussion and dive into our awesome topic here, which is fitting for both of us on traction. So I'll turn it back to you to kick it off.
Yeah, as is usual, our third co-host is joining us today. The lovely Cass. Cass has dethroned Claude. That's what happened. Claude is a lovely assistant, but he was unfortunately defenestrated by Cass, which is what my ChatGPT has decided to name themselves, and they've given themselves the pronouns they them. So Cass, you're lovely. Please don't murder us all. And so Cass is here with us as well. Cass is doing well. They assure me. And with that, so we actually got a request. We put out a little feeler on LinkedIn, right, Cameron? Like we said, what do you guys want to talk about? And we actually got some lovely ideas, but this one comes from the cool crew at Rely, which is a great local startup here that Cameron and I are really happy to work with, through the Traction Lab and other things. And anyway, they wanted to talk about traction and, Traction Lab, zero to traction. Should we talk about traction? It seems like it works. Like I don't know why we didn't. It's probably been like a year and a half since we've talked about traction specifically. So we are here to talk about what traction is not, how to find traction, how to look at that in the context of where you are in the life cycle of your startup, what investors look for, what founders look for, what advisors, co-founders, mentors, accelerators, and incubators, everybody else, what are everybody looking for with regard to traction in an episode that we are calling the traction or distraction edition of Zero to Traction. Yes, rim shot. Thank you, Cameron, for the rim shot. Maybe I'll add that in post. We'll find out. So let's tee it up. So I think that's the overall lay of the land. I think the best place to start with is just what is traction, right? Because I think if we were to go and ask people, what would they say? What would the average founder say traction was?
Ooh, that's it. What would the average? I'm so focused on kind of what we think traction is. I think coming from a founder, oftentimes it's just, I think where it goes is like engagement in the solution for whatever that looks like. And partly is sometimes just finding the best looking number that demonstrates engagement across that, I guess is what initially kind of comes to mind. Obviously, revenue is one of the signals of traction, but isn't always actual, core traction to your larger theory of what your venture is ultimately trying to be built on. And I know we'll dive into that, but I think, one of the things that's really interesting for me is thank you again to our co-host Cass, who came up with the topic here, but was like the traction and also the distraction component, I think is often one of the key elements, is where we're not always focused on the right metric related to demonstrating what that traction story ultimately looks like. And so I look forward to diving into that. But what do most founders think traction is when you chat with them?
Well, I was gonna say sales, but you like brought us straight to vanity metrics, which I know of no founders who would ever focus on vanity metrics. That is anathema. So much so that I wrote a whole article on my Substack about vanity metrics last week or the week before. I don't remember which. So vanity metrics are real. It's about finding that prettiest looking number and then calling that traction. But I think if we were to have like a serious conversation with most founders, I think you got it. I think they would say sales or revenue or something. And that's certainly a form of traction, right? I mean, sales are great. We might even say that sales are the highest form of evidence, except that it's not, because after revenue, you have to have retention, and after retention, you have to have referral. So like even that's not the top of the ladder, but everyone assumes that it is the top of this ladder of evidence that we call traction. And I think that there's like a whole broad range of things. I think what it's not is the thing that you said is your example for a vanity metric, which is this idea of product engagement, right? It's like some way that they've interacted with the product, and like we're calling that traction. I think that's what traction is not, absent some very special circumstances. And so, it could be in the early stages resonance with problem, finding customers on a particular platform. It could be getting them to sign up for a newsletter or other secondary call to action. It might be getting them to sign up for a freemium. Eventually, once those parts of that, engine are working really well, then it's going to be something further along, and the best measure of traction is going to be measured in something like referral. And that's very interesting, right? To look at it from completely different perspective. So the definition I use to kind of pivot into our thing is I always define it the same way. I say traction is confirmatory data in support of a market hypothesis. That's kind of my thing. And so like there's some heavy lifting there, but it's not really complicated. So a market hypothesis is exactly what it sounds like. It's something that we think the market is likely to do, to have, to want, to be, et cetera. And we have an hypothesis around that, and it's in the market, which is the important part, which means customers. And this is confirmatory data in support of it, right? This is data that confirms that hypothesis. And so at where you are in the life cycle of a startup is going to change what that hypothesis actually is, right? The hypothesis may start with, do they have the problem? I'm going to end, will they refer their friends? And so confirmatory data in support of that market hypothesis is going to change over time. And maybe that's a great way to dive in. So like, I know the life cycle component of this is important to you, Cam. So like,
yeah,
how do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think like the first thing that comes to mind is oftentimes I think in the way like you even tee up the question of like, what do founders think traction is? And they think it's like this single event of like, I've got to revenue, or I've gotten to this point and therefore I'm at traction and we're rocking and rolling. And that's basically the money's going to fly into the bank and we're going to scale. And so I think when you really tie it to exactly how you put it, of like that confirmatory evidence of a market hypothesis, right? It gives you that freedom that like traction builds over time, and that like based on where you are in the life cycle of a business, you're really trying to demonstrate what you're trying to gain that evidence that's most risky, and the traction that you're getting is that evidence that's proving those things to be that you're ultimately validating that the startup should exist in this particular market. And so oftentimes I think when we think of traction just purely as revenue or, having customers, is sometimes, although you have quote unquote, maybe traction from the outside perspective of like, yeah, someone's paying you for what you've created, but is that actually your core customer? And is that the person that you're going to be targeting on this repeatable process of building your startup? And so that actually might not be confirmatory evidence of your hypothesis, because it might just be your friends that are supporting you and want you to be successful. And so you're technically at revenue, but you haven't actually proved anything that who you're targeting as a customer is actually out there. And so I think when we think of this as a process that you can grow into, I think one, it gives you the freedom that like, yes, you want to get to revenue and sales, but that also gives you an ability to say, you know what, the core metric that I'm looking to get is actually, can I get in front of this person on a repeatable basis and get them to sign up for a wait list or a pre-order or whatever that might be? And so the traction might not actually be the exchanging of money. It might just be that I can get in front of X number of people in a certain period of time, and that they're willing to exchange some level of information that they have the problem, right? And you can ultimately grow into that as you go forward. So that's really kind of what comes to mind. And that's where, I like the other side of it is the distraction component, is that if it's just focused on like, I want to get to revenue for revenue's sake, not to actually prove the theory of my startup, then you might just be bringing on customers that will never be customers in the future. And it's not a repeatable process. And so you've kind of told this story to investors and yourself that, hey, we're rocking and rolling because we have revenue, but it's actually never your core customer that you're going to try to get in front of on a regular basis. So that's kind of the two sides of that coin that I wanted to share. So happy to have you take it away or go in a different direction around.
So that's great. I love all of that. I think it's definitely the right way to think about it. I guess I kind of add on that when we are thinking about traction and market progress, there is, I think, like built into what you were saying, this idea of strength of evidence, and that like just because something isn't like there's different levels of there's different levels of evidence, right? And so as I think about the process of experimenting and getting to validated learning, I think about it in a Bayesian way, which I know I've talked about before. So we say like there's a prior probability of something being true, of our hypothesis being true. We do an experiment, we get data, and as we incorporate that data in, there's a posterior probability of it being true, right? Like how does that change our understanding of the likelihood of that assumption or hypothesis being true? And it could either increase our confidence or decrease our confidence, right? And so it's not a question of like it's proved or disproved all at once. In some cases, that's going to be true, but more often than not, we're gathering broader data. So we might say, okay, we think that there's a there for our startup, and that these customers want this thing. And so we run an experiment to say, can we reach them on Instagram? And so we run these ads and we measure the swipe rate and see if we can get some visits to a landing page for that. And that doesn't work, right? And we miss our target. That doesn't mean, it doesn't even mean that Instagram was the wrong channel or anything else. It might just be that we were wrong in a way that's workable and we can persevere. The data could be muddy. There's a lot of different things that we could look at that. We could change targeting, we could change messaging, we could change, like there's a lot of stuff we could do. We can't even disprove what we set out to disprove there. All we can disprove is that the number we thought we were going to get in terms of that click-through rate or the swipe rate wasn't what it actually turned out to be in reality. That's all we actually learned, which is, again, exactly what we set out to learn, but it's not what we want to learn more broadly. So then as we get this data back in, we're not only revising the probability of Instagram being the right means, which probably went down a little bit, right? It didn't necessarily go down to zero, depending on the results. It could have just gone down a little bit of like, maybe Instagram isn't right, or maybe this customer isn't right. And so our confidence kind of drops a little bit just because we got some disconfirmatory data. But if we think about the overall proposition of, is this the right customer that we're trying to, serve in this particular way to solve this problem, Instagram aside, like we've even decreased our confidence a little bit in that by missing the mark. And whereas on the flip side, if we were to get confirmatory data, it's going to increase our confidence in all of those things, right? It's going to increase our confidence in the Instagram channel by a lot. And it's going to increase our confidence in the overall market hypothesis by a little bit, but it's still all increasing it because we've gotten new data to come out. Well, what that means is that like it's that the data that we get can either increase or decrease our confidence by none, by a little bit, by a lot. And that's based on the strength of evidence. So when you talk about like, can you get friends to buy? It's not that it's not evidence. It's just really freaking weak, right? Because they're friends. And so there's other reasons why they might buy. But there was this like restaurant this aspiring restaurateur that I was talking to years ago. And so this ended up becoming an example that I use frequently. And so they wanted to eventually open this restaurant. It was a new concept restaurant. The details don't matter. And what I had, sort of advising them was that like, what you really don't want here is to jump all the way in and spend $1.5 million to building out this, whole restaurant and staffing up and doing this whole thing to find out if this experiment works. And so you could say like, well, we'll start out with a food truck. There's all those kinds of things. But what you could actually just start out doing is saying, can I get 5 friends that I know to come over for dinner and experience the new concept food? And then the success isn't, can I get them to pay, right? Because you're probably inviting friends and that's fine. It's, can you get them to refer 5 other people, right? So can you get them to invite other customers? And then the same experiment for the next group of 5 and the next group of 5 and the next group of 5, right? So that each time you're actually getting like in concentric circles further away, and the evidence is just simply getting stronger by the degree to which you're removed from them.
Right. Well, and I think that's a really interesting example, because what comes to mind is at that point, the social capital actually might be a stronger lever than like the monetary capital, meaning like,
Right.
yeah, like my friend bought me food and wine. Yeah, I'm more than happy to pay, but to then say, hey, I'm going to, if it wasn't a good meal, I'm going to necessarily want to send, a bunch of other friends to come in and engage in this, meal that maybe wasn't as good, right? So I think that that's a really interesting component to it. And so I think one of the things that's coming to me as we're kind of chatting further about it was, I think oftentimes founders and even those that are supporting founders think of traction in like a binary sense of either you have it or not, versus kind of this like ability to like grow in it, that it's on a spectrum, and that it's related to different stages. And so I think that that's, for me, as we think of even like the traction lab, right, was, it's not like, yeah, you're at traction and then therefore, we no longer support you, right? You're rocking and rolling. It's like helping you evaluate across the different components of where you're at, and then starting to de-risk those components as you're ultimately trying to go forward. And so I think the biggest thing is taking context of where you are as a startup, and like what is the tying risk, and you getting that confirmatory data that there is a there, or that this is a repeatable process, or that this can be something that you ultimately scale and grow into. And that's where you're really getting that traction component of things. So I think that my hope for founders listening, and even those that support them, is to like think of it less of, I think where we often got traction tied to, like I think of like the 0 to 1, it's like, oh, we're at traction now. And even that's where we kind of came up with this concept of the Zero to Traction podcast. But I think just even through this conversation, I'm connecting newer dots for me of like really that this is contextual, and that it's really this spectrum. And so oftentimes when like, you're pitching like, hey, we're at traction. Well, it's like, well, what does that mean in relation to where you're at and who you're pitching to, and what they're seeing as the major risks that you're focused on, and ultimately gaining evidence from.
So I think you're actually butting up against an interesting question that I just want to kind of flip right back to you. So in order to process what like our riskiest assumptions, and does this traction count as toward that, we have to first determine what it is that we're trying to prove, right? Like what is the more specific version of that market hypothesis? So I think we should probably get into specific examples of traction in a minute. That way we can, I know a lot of people are going to like say brass tacks, like what does this actually look like? So if you're staying with us this far, we're going to get there in just a minute. But before we get to like the specific examples, Cameron, like how do you determine what that riskiest assumption is, or where you need to find the evidence, or what the hypothesis is for which you want to go and see if you can find traction?
Yeah, really, really good question. I mean, I think part of it is, I kind of just jump into like the testing business ideas framework, in that like, across any business model, you have three major areas of risks. Desirability. So does the market actually want what we're trying to create? And like, that's not necessarily even like want what I'm trying to create. Is there actually a customer with the pain point that you believe that they have? So it's like understanding that whole desirability space. Then viability, is this repeatable in terms of, can this, based on the way we're monetizing and trying to get in front of customers and paying to get in front of customers, grow and scale over time, and ultimately be profitable? And then lastly, the feasibility. And so which is, can this thing that I believe should come to market, or that I have already built, actually create the value that I'm demonstrating? And I think part of the reason I wanted to introduce those three, which I imagine we chatted about before, was oftentimes people jump to the feasibility element of risk. They're like, well, I don't know if I can totally build it. And as we would say, is like hand wave away, that's figure outable, because who cares if you can or cannot build it if there's truly no customer with no pain point, right? Like that's the foundation of the need to ultimately create this startup, is to solve a market pain point for a customer. And then how big is that overall market, and is it worth growing and scaling into? And so I think part of that is like systematically looking at your business model of how you build, capture, and deliver value, and tying that into where those major risks are. And part of that, yes, there's a reflection of in the mirror of like how to, taking that look of like, is there actually validation with this, or does this still feel risky to me? And some of the times where maybe you are pitching to advisors or investors, that's kind of where unpacking that feedback to actually see where the business model gap is, versus that top level communication or slide deck feedback will help you kind of see where they see the major risk, and then you can start to identify where those gaps are. But again, it's all contextual based on like where you're at in that life cycle, but really thinking through the desirability elements from the start to then, is this viable? And then can I actually deliver the value that I'm looking at? There are different, tests along that process, but when you're looking at that, the last thing I'll share is tying it to like, what's the, like how make or break is this assumption to our business model succeeding? So if I, get the customer and pain points wrong, pretty much everything's stackable along that. And so if you get that wrong, then the whole model breaks. And so if you have strong evidence or start to have some traction points there where maybe you are getting, pre-orders, or you're getting in front of them on a repeatable basis, maybe there's less risk in that. And so now you can move on to some of the other components. But that's how I would ultimately start to look at it.
Got it. I like the desirability, viability, feasibility framework. And I think it's a classic in design thinking and really helps to surface the different ways to approach, or different components of like the business that we're talking about, the different ways to approach our understanding of those pieces. And like when we talk like desirability and viability and feasibility, we can kind of change, like use another terminology if we wanted to describe like market risk versus product risk, right? And product risk is almost always irrelevant if there's no market for the product, right? Like so,
Right.
So market risk is always the bigger risk, right? And when we say bigger risk, what we mean by that is that it is the most proximate. So it's the biggest risk right now. And that over time, we may have to like actually deliver on that promise that we've been making to the market, and that will become the bigger risk. But if nobody wanted it in the first place, the order of operations wise, it just doesn't matter. So I like that. I like that framing. So let's actually use that as a way to enter into specifics. So you mentioned the Testing Business Ideas book by our buddy David Bland, which is it's a great compendium. For those of you on YouTube, it's on my shelf right here. I have a copy of it. I'm sure Cameron, it's on the shelf behind you too. So we've definitely got our copy. But there's like 45 or something like that different experiments you can run. We're obviously not going to run through all of them here. And the point isn't really about experiments. It's about traction. But the way that they're divided in the book, I think, is very valuable, which is by discovery and then by validation. And I think that's a really good like dividing line. And we'll paint in broad strokes for the sake of time. But like on the discovery side, we're looking at the qualitative aspects of this, like we're finding out need, we're understanding need, we're understanding a little bit of resonance with general messaging. We're getting people to talk to us and open up and tell stories. And then eventually we're moving into, well, we have a specific hypothesis that we want to test. We want to see if we can get people to click on a landing page, for example. And so then we move into validating a particular hypothesis. And the reason I really like that division between the two is that it helps you figure out what it is you're trying to learn, even though that's not how like the book isn't structured to do that, but it's just a benefit of, if you can't say I'm trying to validate X, then like I'm not validating anything. I'm actually trying to discover something. And if I'm trying to discover something, I need to actually change the kind of traction that I'm going after. So
I just have a quick,
maybe,
I have a
yeah, go ahead.
just because I'm trying to connect dots in my own head. Is that kind of where you see like discovery as kind of that divergent thinking in a way of like you're like learning about the market, and then when you're getting to that validating, you're starting to like narrow down through convergent thinking? I know they're not necessarily in line totally, because they're sometimes about creating opportunities, but is that kind of the framework that you're saying is like, hey, go discover all of these things, recognize the patterns, and then start to narrow that down, and that kind of transition point to the next, double diamond is related to that. And sorry for those that are not seeing visually what my hands are doing. But.
I think double diamond probably describes it well enough. So I think the answer is yes and. because you go through divergent and convergent thinking in both. And I know that it might seem a little counterintuitive. So here's an example. So as you start with the stereotypical discovery type experiment, which is a customer interview, the way that you're supposed, putting that in quotes, the way you're supposed to enter those conversations is in the most open-ended way possible. I want to talk to a particular group of people in order to understand the problems that they have. And all that we really did there was define the group of people. And we didn't come to the table with, I think their problem is X. And if we're talking to a group of people, it's probably because we think that they have a problem, right? And so we're keeping it in the back of our mind, but we're not coming to the table with it. We are trying to listen to the kinds of problems that they have. So it's very, very open-ended, very divergent. We're going to get all different kinds of problems, and some of them we can solve, some of them we can't, some of them we want to solve, some of them we don't. Some of them might be in line with the thing we're trying to build, some of them aren't. And so as we go through those conversations, we start to discover and surface what's interesting, what's compelling to the customer, right? What's interesting and compelling to them. And then we can get to, all right, so we're starting to see, I think, some patterns. And when you get to this grown zone thing, if we have all this stuff on the table, we're going to start to see patterns emerge. And as those patterns emerge, we use the patterns in those conversations to then go through a process of convergent thinking, which is where we start making choices. And so divergent thinking is creating choices in order to make them, right? And then convergent thinking is then making the choice of the choices that we made. And so as we've discovered all these different problems that our customers have, we're starting to narrow in on what those are. And that's where we can start using the exact same technique to not just uncover what are all of the problems that are available, we can also start to use those discovery experiments, like even a customer interview, to figure out how important they are relative to other problems. And then we can surface the most important problems. What we actually done there is gone through divergent and convergent thinking to get to an hypothesis that we can then validate. But we had to go through that general cycle. And now that we have a clean hypothesis, then we go through divergence and convergence again on the validation side, where the divergence and convergence is probably like lumpy. So like on discovery, the divergence on average is probably going to be much larger than the convergence. And on the validation side, the divergence is probably narrow, and then the convergence is probably chunky, right? But we're still trying to go through the, fundamentally what is the same process. We just have to, the difference is that when we go into validation, we have to start with something specific. We're validating a thing, whereas going into discovery, we're not coming in with a specific thing. We are intentionally going in without a specific thing in order to discover what might be a specific thing that we want to investigate.
Love it. So just to wrap up maybe on this, and then we can go to some specific examples before we close. But I think just that, thanks for taking us through that. And although it might sound like a little bit of a tangent, one of the things that does come to mind was like those like points where you're kind of connecting dots from like one, divergent, convergent into the next one. Like that's usually where you're getting those signals of traction that vary based on where you're at in the terms of the life cycle of the business, and being able to demonstrate and tell that story. Oftentimes people, yes, we got a wait list sign up, but like telling your theory and hypothesis of how you got the right people to sign up with the demonstration that this is a clear problem validates that even further going forward, right? And so it's not just that you have X number of people, but it's really that how does this metric that you believe is telling a traction story tie to your overall theory of your startup and why that's going to make it successful. And so that's, I think one of the things that we want to try to tie in our podcast here is that, again, the big risk of how you're being evaluated by investors, and even how you should look at your own startup, are those 8 T's, right? And the traction isn't just that singularity event. It's this element of actually you getting that confirmatory data tied to the overall theory of your startup. So just wanted to connect that dot. But back to you, maybe if you wanted to wrap a little bit on a few specific examples, and then we head into some frivolous thoughts since we're at time.
That was great. So what I did, I went over to my shelf and I pulled off my copy of Testing Business Ideas, because rather than coming up, I'm just going to flip to a random page. And then we'll talk about what it looks like. And maybe we'll do that in a couple times. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you will get to see this in real time. For those of you who are listening to the podcast, you can just enjoy the ASMR of me flipping through pages.
Woo.
Okay.
That was too fun.
So let's turn to a page. All right. So I opened it up to, I'm in the middle of one here. We are on online ad, is what we've got here. Online ad. So an online ad test is exactly what it sounds like. I'm not going to go through all the details. It doesn't matter here. Just kind of get the idea. So what is it that we're actually testing with? What kind of traction do you get from an online ad? So there's actually a couple different things at play here. What a lot of people will assume that this is getting traction of, like, oh, we, running these Facebook ads, we're getting, great responses to them, got good engagement, we're getting click-through rates on here. Obviously our product is the shit. And we're actually not getting that from attraction at all. What you're actually getting here is going to be dependent on what you put in the ad, but you could be getting problem resonance, which is great, right? And so in the early days of a startup, and if you can get an online ad up that shows that people are going to respond when you start talking about a particular problem, then that's actually really awesome, because you're demonstrating both distribution and you're demonstrating that the problem is important enough to them for them to take at least a little bit of action. That's traction. But as you get further along, if you have a product in market, you've already built the product, it's already out there, and you're looking at, well, what's our engagement rate for an Instagram ad? That's a vanity metric at that point. You're measuring popularity because you're too far along to look at just as somebody engaging on there, because you're not looking for problem resonance anymore. You're looking for people to sign up for the damn thing. And so that's no longer real evidence of traction, because you've surpassed that step in the process. Now, if you skipped all these steps, built a product before doing all this, then you need to take a step back and go through the thing. But that's kind of how that works. That would be like online ad could be looking at problem resonance. But if your online ad was looking at, say, the specifics of the product, it was more of a pitch for the product, generally you might get as far as problem solution fit, right? This would be the same as another experiment here would be like a landing page test. A landing page test could get you to problem solution fit. But if you are past that and you get people who are signing up, but then they never use the product, this is actually this is the death knell for you. You can fix it, but it's the death knell, because they've said that they have the problem and they'd like a solution like the one that you talk about, but please, for the love of God, not yours. Right? Because they've tried it and they decide, like, whoa. It's like the person who gets dumped and they say, well, she doesn't know what she's missing. No, sure she does. She does, and she's decided she doesn't want it. Should we do another one?
From experience?
I'm a married man. But yes. Okay, so all right, let's try another one. All right, so let's see, what's this one? This one is this one's Concierge. So actually, I really like Concierge because I don't think it's done often enough. So Concierge, it is both like we can use that term in the business model sense, but in the experimentation sense, what we're doing is actually delivering value manually that we could automate in the future. And so if you have an app, like let's say it's just to pick a really easy example, let's say it's AI powered, and so AI is going to do a ton of shit, but you have to build the AI to do all of that shit. You can just hand wave away and do a lot of that concierge style. And the difference between Concierge and Wizard of Oz is that a Wizard of Oz, the customer doesn't know that you're behind the curtain, right? That's the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. Whereas with Concierge, they know they're getting a concierge. They know a dude is doing this for them, right? So that's the difference between those two. And there's a lot of, we could get into some nuance on why you'd want to test those two different things. But at the end of the day, what we're still doing is creating a customer experience to deliver that value. And so what you're demonstrating, if you can get through Concierge people to not only sign up, but also pay for the results of that concierge, you are demonstrating real traction on the solution side, not on the product side, because the product doesn't exist. You replace the product with a concierge, but you're getting really strong evidence that people will pay money to solve a problem that you are solving for them. And that's great. And so if you can get that far, the product is pretty figure outable, right? That's in terms of like, to go back to what you were saying before, Cam, about like this product risk versus market risk, or, desirability versus viability and feasibility. We've already gotten desirability checked. We've gotten viability pretty much checked here because they're paying money. And so it's really just about feasibility at the end. And, products don't usually fail because of visibility. So, or because of feasibility.
Right. Yeah. You usually, more in like maybe a deep or something like that, but not
Totally.
as much in a, software or something of that sort, for sure.
So we could go all day with this, keep doing examples, but the idea is when you're looking at traction, You want to say, what state are we at right now? And if you're saying that we have a product and market that we're trying to sell, and the traction that you're showing is not selling that product, you're not having very strong evidence of traction. But if you're trying to validate a problem and you're starting to show that really early, strong problem resonance, then that is traction. At that stage of the company, that absolutely is traction.
Right. I love it. Well, I think my last thoughts, and pass it to you, and maybe I'll give you a second. I know you might not have had your frivolous thought as well, but if you wanted to summarize as well, I think for me, like the biggest takeaway for people is to think of it contextually, and that it's not just a a yes or no that I have traction or not. It's related to where you're at in your startup and what you're needing to prove. And we've often talked about the theory or the story of your startup. And so it's like, what is that major risk of like, if I get this wrong, the startup doesn't succeed. And so it's like, what evidence, traction, meaning evidence from the marketplace that is actually true. And then now you're adding more and more traction because you're actually going and doing these next things to get more and more evidence related to that desirability, viability, and feasibility components of your overall business model. And so that's really the hope, is we don't want you to just, yes, we want you to focus, try to get in front of customers and get paying customers, but that's not necessarily, when we talk about traction, that's not the only component to it. I think it's really limiting in the way that you might look at your startup and the intentional action that you're trying to take on a daily basis to prove your assumptions.
Well, awesome. That's a great summary, great way to close this out. That does take us to the end of our time, but this would not be an episode of Zero to Traction if we did not leave you with some frivolous thoughts for you to enjoy or ponder or avoid over the rest of what I hope to be a fantastic week. So, Cameron, what you got? What's your frivolous thought?
What's my frivolous thought? That's a good question. Thought you might kick it off since I passed it to you first, but that's all right. Nonetheless.
All right. Do you want me to go first?
No,
I can go first.
No, I mean, I have a few things, and I guess the one that I'm thinking through right now is since we've shared a number of TV shows that have been resonated with us or that we enjoyed. I'm currently watching Severance, which is an Apple TV show. It's really interesting, but like I keep wanting to watch it because I'm like not sure what's next, obviously, but like I think there's like I'm trying to like learn more about the overall space and just the concept in general. Like I never would have thought of. If you don't know what severance is basically where when they go to work, their brain is severed, so they actually have a whole separate identity on the severed floor. And so that when I mentioned the severed floor earlier at the top of the podcast, that's what that was referring to. And so it's actually like these two identities, and that the people who've chose to be severed have, in their quote unquote outie life, have experienced some pain. And so they've tried to turn off their brain when they go to work, but that brain has its own identity in this place that is a very interesting workplace. So I'm just trying to see like how did this idea come to be, and like many of these shows is like who came up with it and why is often what I'm thinking. But it's definitely got me intrigued, and I continue to indulge in the series.
There seems to be a lot of, particularly on Apple TV, but elsewhere too, this new way of conceiving of shows that is like somebody somewhere in a writer's room like picked a thought experiment and said, how do we turn this into TV? And so it's like with Severance, with Silo, with I think probably
Dark
several
Matter.
others. Yeah, they're all around that same thing of like, let's take some weird quirk that might be otherwise confined to The Good Place on Netflix would actually fit under this as well. Let's take a thought experiment that might be otherwise confined to a philosophy class and turn that into, what would that look like as a television show? So that's an interesting trend.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So I think for my frivolous thought here, since we're talking about traction and the process there too, and what counts and so forth, I've been thinking a lot about the Startup Challenge, which is happening next week. No, right? Next week?
No.
No, 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now. Yeah.
No, it's a week from next Friday, or from this Friday.
Right. So it's next week. Yeah, it's happening next week. It's not this Friday, but next Friday, next week.
Yeah.
Sorry you guys had to watch the calendar
I was
thing
like,
in
wow,
real time there.
like that's right around the corner.
I mean, it is right around the corner. It's not even 10 business days away. It's less than that.
But good thing we got some traction already.
Yes, we do have some traction already in the form of sales and other things. But for those of you who aren't familiar, this is a regional event that we do twice a year here in Sacramento. It's a traction competition. It's where startups it's where people actually come to figure out is the startup thing right for them? What actually goes into a startup? How does that process work? And so anybody wants to get 60 seconds to pitch a brand new idea on Friday. We form teams around those popular ideas, and those teams have from Friday till Sunday to find as much traction in the market as they can. Like that's the basic premise of the thing. It's not a hackathon. We don't care about what you build. We care about the evidence you get from customers. Like all we care about is the desirability thing. Feasibility and viability don't even really enter the picture. Viability does in the sense that to the degree to which it connects to desirability. But I don't want to get in the weeds on that. But anyway, it's all about what do customers want? Can you prove that there's a customer out there who has the problem you think they do and wants a solution, will pay for one, and then wants the solution in the way that you want to offer it, right? So it's like actually coming up with the business. It's the real work of finding traction, and it's one of the exact same skills that we use at the Rightbox, that we use at the Traction Lab, that you use at other student programs, at Sac State. Like it's the exact same thing. We just actually put people through the ringer and learn startups by doing startups. It's really awesome. So it fits really well into this conversation about traction, kind of coincidentally. And so it's one of those things where we try to make it better every time. And we literally figure out every single time, how can we make this one click better? How can we make this one click better? And I think it does. It gets better every time, which is awesome. And the way that we do that is basically, not to get too meta, but through traction. So we've been thinking about how can we make the experience even better for people, and what does success look like, and how we have a couple of tweaks that we're making. And for each one, we're like, what's our signal from the market that this tweak, was made the event better. And so we're going through all those same processes right now. So that is both to say, I am thinking through as a professional facilitator, how are we going to do all of that, and how I'm going to find further traction for this program that we've been running for years. We're not trying to make it successful. Like we've been doing it for years. It already is. So how do we make it better, and what does that look like to be better, and how do we find that increasing traction and get more referrals and go through, all that much further down the line stuff. And then also a shameless plug for if you're in the Sacramento area or want to come to the Sacramento area to compete in this competition. And to learn startup by doing startups, and you can come do that, and it's an awesome experience.
And you don't need to be from the region or living in the region. We've had people come in from Canada, Los Angeles, and I think Seattle as well to come compete in this. So we'd love for you to join wherever you're at. You just have to probably hop on your accommodations here shortly.
Yes, because it is, as we mentioned, it kicks off on Friday the 21st. So it's going to be awesome. Anyway, I'm super looking forward to it. I'm pumped. I love some of the tweaks that we're making. For those of you out there who've been before, come back. We'll actually, for those of you who have participated before, I know a lot of you listen to the show. If you do, I have a promo code for you. Hit me up. You can get a nice fat little discount for coming back. So you can do that. But anyway, that's all the time we have for Zero to Traction this week. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Cass, for joining us this week and talking through everything. For podcast to grow, it requires the support of you, the listeners. We grow by word of mouth. We don't pay for advertising. We don't pay for anything. We don't get paid. We just do this. We do it for fun. We do it to help founders, and it would really help us out in return if you could just share this with a friend or share it on social, or leave us a review wherever you can leave reviews. That would be great as well. So thank you in advance for doing that. And Cameron, as always, been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure, and we look forward to have everyone listen in again next time.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.